I want to talk about this article that I happened to read early this morning, even before I got out of bed. Every day I normally Google my name to see, who's writing about me, if anybody's quoting me. And so I put my name into Google, and this article comes up. And the article is called Capitalism and the Universal Religion. And it's written by this guy who has a master's degree in literature. This guy, Peter Dunnick. And he's a teacher, a tutor, lives up in Canada, authored several books. And so I started reading his piece. And, of course, he's a socialist, Marxist, which is very fashionable today, with the success of the Piketty capitalism book. But I wanted to just go over some of his points just so you can really see how these socialists think, right? How crazy they really are. So first, let me talk about where he brings me up. So he writes, in defense of economic insanity, American businessman Peter Schiff argued that civilization stops working if business leaders don't have a profit motive. According to his reasoning, since people are cowards, brave business leaders must take all the risks in starting a business, and for their bravery, they deserve to be rewarded. And he says, excuse me, but employees are the real risk takers, right? Because employees risk getting fired. So clearly this guy doesn't know what he's talking about when you're talking about risk taking. Employees don't take risks in that they get paid for their work. If you are an employee and you show up and you do a day's labor, you are guaranteed a day's pay. Your boss has to pay you. So that's not a risk. Sure, you might get fired, so now you have to get another job. But you're always going to get paid for the work that you do. The risk-taking of an entrepreneur is that the entrepreneur does work and he has no idea if he's going to get paid. He does it on the come. He takes a job and has to pay all of his workers. He's got to pay all his suppliers. He's got to pay his landlord. He's got to pay everybody. Only if there's money left over does the entrepreneur make anything at all. That's a risk. You don't know if you're going to make any money. And maybe you have to put up money. Maybe in order to start a business, you have to invest some of your savings. Maybe you have to put up $25,000, $50,000 of your hard-earned money that you set aside, that you were earning, that you didn't spend. And maybe you take this money and you start a business, and maybe it fails and you lose everything. The employee doesn't risk that. He doesn't put any of his capital at risk, any of his savings at risk. He risks nothing if the business fails. All he risks is he has to get another job. That's not a risk. But it shows you how little respect the socialist has for the entrepreneur, for the businessman, for the business owner. And they think that people who own businesses should not be rewarded for the risks that they take. Well, if that's the case, they won't take any risks. And if people don't take risks, there will be no jobs. Everybody will have to work for themselves. And here, listen to his second paragraph. He says, and I dislike the premise of Schiff's argument. Why must we assume that we need a culture that rewards risk-taking? Of course we need that culture, right? People who understand neither morality nor mortality think taking risks is heroic. I don't even know what he means by that. But here's the worst sentence. Today, they are heroically risking the livability of the whole planet in return for profits siphoned from the customers across the planet. So first of all, the guy's talking about capitalists are going to destroy the whole planet with pollution, right? But listen to this line. So they can siphon profits from their customers, as if customers are walking around with profits in their pockets and the entrepreneur siphons them out. Profits aren't siphoned away from anybody. Profits are created out of nothing. The entrepreneur is entitled to the profit because he produced a profit. Where does a profit come from? A businessman gets a profit if he can produce a product or a service that somebody desires, but he can do it for less than the cost that customer is willing to pay. So the profit is the value added, something created out of nothing that the entrepreneur is entitled to. If it wasn't for profits, we would have no products, we would have no services being provided by others. But it actually gets worse, because before he starts to talk about me, he talks about how products make people rich, and therefore they're bad. See, he talks about the cell phone. The miraculous cell phone also centralizes wealth. Before the age of the phone, no one made money from anybody's need to communicate by voice. But now he's upset that people are making money off of people communicating. Well, so what? I mean, you could still communicate without somebody making a dime off you. You could talk for free. If you want, you could stick your head out your window, Rocky Balboa style, and yell. You could do that for free. But somehow it's a problem because I can call someone on the telephone, and the guy that made the telephone is making a profit. The company that provides the telephone service, because somebody is getting rich, it should bother me that there's something wrong. My life is made better. This is all about jealousy. This is all about envy. This is not about advocating an economic system that benefits people. You're talking about trying to stifle people. You're talking about envying successful people who earn their success by making the lives of other people better. What has this fool ever done to make anybody's life better? Nothing. But I want to talk about where it really gets ridiculous. I'm going to take a break, and I'm going to talk about where he is longing for the good old days before we had cars, when everybody rode on horses. According to this guy, we were better off riding horses because at least we weren't making the automobile manufacturers and the oil barons rich. Here's a paragraph. He says, to understand the distributing power of technology, right, consider the horse. Once upon a time, horses provided transportation, and although they were not cheap, anyone who had a bit of land could feed one for free. Of course, and if you had a female horse, you could get her pregnant and have a second horse. Now, when you switch from a horse to a car, the industrial model places the power of reproduction in the hands of a few wealthy manufacturing barons. And feeding your cars means you must make wealthy oil barons wealthier. Consequently, the power to create new wealth is now centralized, and the profits flow into the pockets of a few industrialists. So what? Are we supposed to be upset that people have gotten rich off of the automobile? Is that what he's saying? Is he saying that we would have been better off without cars if we still rode around on horses because at least we wouldn't be making the oil men rich? Is that what he's saying? Does he have any idea? Has this guy ever even ridden a horse? I'm going to give you an idea, because a lot of people don't realize what life was like in the 1800s, you know. So I look back at some of the prices. A horse back in 1800, 1850, really didn't matter. The prices were the same. You know, they had no inflation back then. But a horse was like $150, but not a horse you can ride. This was a horse that would pull a plow. You wanted a horse you could ride, a broken horse that was suitable to saddle up and ride. You're at least $200. So let's say $200 for the horse. But of course, you're not going to ride around bareback. You need a saddle, you need a bridle, you need to shoe the horse. So you figure $250 all in to get yourself a horse you can ride. How much was $250 back in 1800, 1850? Well, unskilled laborers earned 75 cents a day. If you had no skills, that was like a minimum wage. That was like the low wage, 75 cents a day. So if you had a minimum wage job, even though there was no minimum wage, but you made 75 cents a day, you had to work for 333 days to get yourself a horse. 333 days. And of course, you couldn't finance it. You had to actually save up the money. So most people didn't have a horse because they couldn't afford it. But in today's terms, if you make $7.25 an hour, assuming you pay no taxes, which of course you do pay taxes, but I'm not even going to factor in taxes, a horse today would cost you the equivalent, with a saddle and a bridle, right? $19,000. Just to buy yourself a horse, you're talking 19 grand. You can buy some brand new cars for less than 19 grand. I mean, I know there are some that cost more, but you could buy a new one for low-end car. You could get great used cars for under 19 grand, 10, 15 grand. You get a pretty good used car. Kids could get used cars for a few $1,000s. $19,000. That's just a horse, which a horse is not even like a car. Horse is maybe more like a motorcycle. Because, you don't have a trunk. If it rains, you get wet. You don't have a back seat. You could buy a motorcycle. You can get a great motorcycle for 19 grand, which is a hell of a lot better than a horse. You could buy a decent motorcycle for a few $1,000s. brand new one, maybe 10 grand, a really nice one, 10, 15 grand. Now, what if you wanted a buggy? What if I'm going to ride around a horse and buggy? Well, a buggy and a bridle for a horse, that's like another $125. So to get a horse, a buggy, and a bridle, not even getting the saddle, now you're talking 25 grand in today's money, $25,000. If you want to throw in the saddle so you can alternate, you're at $29,000. So easily a horse, just to buy it, was in general more expensive than buying a car today, certainly if you buy a used car. But now that's just the beginning of the story. Where are you going to put your horse? I mean, you need a barn. I mean, you don't even need a garage for a car. You can park your car on the street. Nothing will happen to it. But you can't leave your horse on the street. You need to put him in a barn. You need to build a barn. You need to have enough land for that barn. I mean, if you lived in a city, you had to be rich. I mean, if you lived in a city, you walked. You didn't have a horse. I mean, you had to be one of the richest people to have a horse in, New York City. But if you lived out in the country, right, out in the suburbs, farmer, you still need to build a barn for that horse. Now, this guy is talking about it doesn't cost money to feed a horse. Well, if you just have some extra land, yeah, you could let it graze. Well, maybe if you have 2 or 3 acres that you're not farming. I mean, if you want your horse to graze, you're going to have to corral in a 2 or 3 acre parcel. How much is that going to cost you? And then you're going to have that land that you're not going to farm? And what do you do in the winter? I mean, you can't, the horse can't be out grazing in the snow. There's no grass. You're going to have to feed him hay. Feeding your horse, if you're going to feed your horse hay, my estimate, hay was about 2 cents a pound back then. So it probably cost you about $50 a week back in today's money to feed your horse. And of course, remember, you had to feed your horse. Even if you didn't ride it, you still had to feed it. A car, you only have to put gas in it when you use it. But if you're talking $50 a week to feed the horse, it's about what people pay for gas. Maybe people pay $100 a week for gas, depending on how much they drive their car. But of course, now what about the horse? You gotta brush it, you gotta wash it, you gotta clean up after it, you gotta clean out the barn. I mean, you got all that manure. I mean, this guy is looking back at the horse as the good old days before you had all these profits. I mean, how clueless can you be? And think about this. Think about, what it was like when you traveled by horse. If you wanted to travel by horse and you had to make a journey, you could generally ride your horse 25 miles in a day. 25 miles. So if you wanted to travel 25 miles away, it's going to take you a day. And then it's going to take you another day to get back. 25 miles. That's a half-hour drive, 40-minute drive. Maybe an hour if you have traffic. A day? I mean, you could probably push your horse if you galloped, ran the horse, right? Maybe you can go 40 miles in a day. But you couldn't do that, 7 days in a row. I mean, even think about the Pony Express, right? Where a guy was on a horse and he ran the horse as fast as he could. And then every 5 or 10 miles, he'd get another horse, right? The Pony Express guys went 75 miles in a day on several different horses, going as fast as they could, right? So you're talking about average leisurely travel, going from point A to point B. I mean, even if you lived, if you had a little farm and you were, a few miles outside of town, it would take you a couple hours to ride into town, a couple hours to ride back. I mean, think about how much more convenient. Think about all the things that we can do now that we have cars as opposed to horses. I mean, life is so much better for average Americans. I mean, poor people have cars. People who never could have afforded a horse have a car, which is so much better than a horse, so much more pleasant, so much more, enjoyable and easy. I mean, think about where you could drive your car. And all of this is due to profits. I mean, are we supposed to be upset when I drive a car that the guy that sold it to me made a profit? Is that supposed to bother me? How about thank God that guy made a profit? Otherwise, I would be on a horse, right? Or am I supposed to get upset that some guy is getting rich off the oil that I'm putting in my car? Because if he wasn't getting rich off that oil, what would I put in my car? How would I get it to go? It wouldn't. I mean, this whole stuff is absurd. That because some people get rich, that it's a problem. It's not a problem. It's a benefit. If people couldn't get rich, nobody would have anything. We'd have no progress. There were no rich cavemen. right? Everybody was the same. Probably the difference between the richest caveman and the poorest caveman was practically nothing.